It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Thursday in July, the day before Independence Day. We are going to discuss the AFC North, some of the moves made around the division, and we are going to break down the four teams in this division and rank them by position groups. We're going to go through every single position group and rank them 1 through 4, and by the end of it, we'll determine what order these teams are going to finish in this division. We did a similar exercise last year, and we're excited to do it again. But first off, Jonas, do you have any plans for the 4th of July, barbecuing, pool hopping, etc.?
Maybe a movie. It depends on the pliability of my friends. I would like to go see F1. I might go see 28 Years Later. The world is my oyster. It's a fun time for movie going.
I would like to see 28 Years Later, but I've never seen 28 Days or 28 Weeks Later. And I feel like a zombie movie you can kind of hop in. You don't really need to know the backstory, but would be nice to have some kind of idea of what's going on.
I hadn't seen 28 Days Later until like 2 weeks ago. It was a little underwhelming, in part because the film stock is, I think it was like intentionally retrograde. Like it looks like it was a crappy VHS tape from the 70s. And it's the kind of, echo effect of if you've seen something that was the genesis of so much, it's tough to see it as anything but like a pale imitation of what came after. So there's like good stuff that, you would recognize from The Walking Dead and all the other zombie canon that we now accept and love, but it didn't really ring as especially epic, even though you appreciate the performances from guys like Cillian Murphy and just kind of the shots that they were able to get of a bear in downtown London. But again, it's I struggle with old movies, even though that isn't that especially old.
Yeah, I also have the same kind of issue. I saw Chinatown, which is like a classic. It was I do like old movies, but like Chinatown was a classic Jack Nicholson movie, and it was on my list for forever. And I went back and watched it because I was curious. Everybody talks about it, and I watched it, and I was kind of shrugging my shoulders because I'd seen it. I'd seen so many of those tropes before in movies that came afterwards, and it sucks because it's not the fault of the original movie. It's the fault of all the movies that come after it. But I wasn't like blown away because there was nothing. To me, there was nothing that unique about it that hadn't been done afterwards, but it's just the order that I watched them in. It was a good movie, but I wasn't amazed at all of the things that this film noir was able to do. Neo-noir, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like watching sports from basically before you were born, or even, I guess, before you became a sports fan. Like you can appreciate Wayne Gretzky skating circles around everyone in 80s and 90s hockey, and you can appreciate Michael Jordan cooking the Jazz in the NBA Finals, but it just looks so easy compared to what the guys in the modern in the modern game have to do nowadays.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's talk about football. Let's not talk about Michael Jordan or movies. We have, if you're watching live on X, on YouTube, and now Facebook, we are live on Facebook for all the aunts and uncles out there. We have a complete positional breakdown of all of the teams in the AFC North. We have broken these down into quarterback, running back / fullback. That's one category. Wide receiver / tight end. That's another category. Offensive line, defensive front, off-ball linebacker, defensive backs, special teams, and coaching. And what we're going to do is give each team a score of 1 through 4 on all of these position groups, and then just add up the total. So the team that has the best quarterback in this division is going to get 4 points. The team has the worst quarterback in this division gets 1 point. We'll do that for every position, add it all up. And Jonas, one quick caveat here. Off-ball linebacker is not going to be a 1 through 4 position because teams typically don't have that many off-ball linebackers on the field anymore as compared to, say, defensive backs.
And also quarterbacks get double the points because they are the most important position in sports.
This is true. As you're saying that, Jonas, I realized I forgot to do that. So I'm going to put quarterback twice on here because I forgot that is a thing that we decided. Quarterback, you have to over-index for because it is a position that matters far more than any other position on the field. And frankly, it's a position where we're not looking too closely at the backups like we might be at other positions, because if a team is down to their backup quarterback, everything kind of falls apart from there. But if they have their starter in there, that raises the ceiling of their team. Jonas, this was all prompted by the blockbuster that was pulled off with the Dolphins and Steelers, the Minkah Fitzpatrick, Jalen Ramsey trade. I've been wanting to talk about the AFC North and in particular the Pittsburgh Steelers offseason for a while now, because I simply cannot wrap my mind around it. I cannot understand what they are doing. And I think I will reveal myself during the course of this rankings by in being a Steelers offseason hater. Are you similarly aligned?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing that they've done is just not shoot themselves in the foot for next year, because that is going to be the year when they're probably going to have to move up in the draft and position themselves to be in the top 6 or 7 draft picks of 2026 and get themselves a franchise quarterback. And if I mean, like, all these moves are probably going to make them a little bit stronger. So we know just how steep that, like the draft asset trade curve is. And I applaud them for going big, being bold, trying to make a swing at a Super Bowl. But I think the returns are so diminishing that, like, you're probably taking your, you're probably taking your ceiling from, in terms of just where you're going to finish draft wise, from like 18th to 22nd, 24th. And that is, short-term gain for a lot of potential long-term pain. You're going to make it, you're going to make it even harder on yourself to go up and get a Nussmeier or get a Sellers or get an Aller next year. And I just don't see it with this offense unless this offensive line really comes together in a big way and these tight ends all really fit together like the Ravens tight end room does. There's just so many ifs baked into the Steelers offseason that it's really tough for you to see them being a team that is hanging around there in early February.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the quarterback, because that is the position where I have been the most flummoxed by the Pittsburgh Steelers. The 4 teams in this division have quarterbacks set at 3 spots. The one team is a little bit of a mystery right now. Bengals have Joe Burrow. Ravens have Lamar Jackson. Steelers have Aaron Rodgers. The Browns have an amalgamation of Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, and Shadur Sanders. But we do know that they will not have Deshaun Watson because he is recovering from injury. And also, the organization has pretty much signaled that he's not going to be their quarterback anytime soon or ever again. Jonas, how would you rank these 4 quarterback situations 1 through 4? 4 through 1.
4 through 1 would obviously be the Browns, because we don't know who's going to be quarterback, and it probably doesn't even really matter. For what it's worth, Deontay Johnson, he of the scaredy cat to play in 41-degree weather in Baltimore against the Eagles vibes, said he expects Kenny Pickett to be quarterback 1, which, maybe that'll happen. Maybe it'll be one of the 2 rookies there. Maybe it'll be good old Joe Flacco, but this is just probably the one of the 2 or 3 worst quarterback situations in the NFL. So it's an easy 4th. Steelers, obviously number 3. Aaron Rodgers has not had a QBR above 48 in his last 2 full seasons. He is turning 42 in December. That makes him 8 years older than Zach Orr. We know that not only is he diminished athletically, but he's still stubborn in terms of what he wants to, how he wants to play as a quarterback. You wonder about his fit with that Steelers offense with Arthur Smith, and then it comes down to the Bengals and the Ravens, and the tie goes to the what should be 2-time defending MVP. It's Lamar. You had a career year last year, got, we think, robbed in the MVP voting. You could say that Joe Burrow is a slightly better pure passer if you were to just kind of drop them into a vacuum, but Lamar, I think, easily clears him in terms of what he offers as a runner and as a scrambler. And we know how important that is in this modern NFL. So even though Joe Burrow is uber talented, I don't think, it would take even a reasonable Cincinnati fans, I think, would have to say that on a normal team, Lamar Jackson at this point probably gives you more than Joe Burrow.
Yep. Agreed in all areas. I think the thing that bothered me the most about what the Steelers did was not necessarily adding Aaron Rodgers this offseason, though I think that that's a pretty disastrous decision that could end up getting Mike Tomlin fired eventually. I think that it was going back to last offseason when they acquired two guys who were on expiring contracts. They thought they tried to say, well, we're getting the best of both worlds by getting a young guy with promise and a veteran. But both those guys were going to be hitting free agency regardless this past offseason, and both those guys left. I mean, Justin Fields went to the Jets. Russell Wilson went to the Giants. So both those guys were out the door, and it left the Steelers back at square one. So neither of those guys had a particularly high ceiling. And when they left the Steelers back in the same spot that they have been. And that's why they've been treading tires for as long as they have, because treading water, I should say, for as long as they have, because they cannot get a long-term answer at quarterback. And so this is just it's fascinating to see also the difference right now in what the Steelers did and what the Browns did at quarterback, because the Browns took as many dart throws as they possibly could in the draft and in free agency. They trade for Kenny Pickett, they signed Joe Flacco, then they draft Dylan Gabriel and Shador Sanders. I don't know if any of those guys is going to work out. I don't know if any of those guys is going to be a good quarterback this season or in the future, but it's drastically different from what the Steelers did. Maybe neither of these strategies work, but these are the desperate times that teams find themselves in. And it makes you feel, if you're following the Ravens, it makes you feel a little bit comfier and cozier knowing that you have somebody who, yes, he's going to require a massive contract extension in the near future, but you still have 28-year-old two-time MVP Lamar Jackson under center.
Just to put a bow on this, what do you think happens first? Lamar gets his extension done, or the Steelers play/draft another quarterback? I guess also sign another quarterback.
I think Lamar gets his extension done. I really think that this Lamar extension is going to happen. I mean, maybe we talked about it last week on our Banner Ravens podcast episode, but maybe the collusion investigation becoming public will change the negotiations of Lamar and the Ravens, but I do tend to think that that's something they would rather get done sooner as opposed to later. And right now, the Browns just have too many bodies in that room. I don't know who's going to come out on top. I don't know if the results will be any different if it's Dylan Gabriel as opposed to Joe Flacco. And that's just going to be a weird thing to watch. But we know for one thing is for sure, the Browns will somehow find a way to beat the Ravens once this season.
I was asking about the Steelers, but go Wolfgang.
Oh, sorry. If the Steelers acquire another quarterback,
Yes.
Yeah, I have no idea. I still think the Ravens will extend Joe Flacco. I think Steelers are going to give Aaron Rodgers a real opportunity to screw this thing up, and screw this thing up, he probably will. All right, let's go to running back. You look at the Bengals running back room. They have Chase Brown, Zach Moss, Samaje Perine. Browns have Jerome Ford, Quinshawn Judkins, the rookie, Dylan Sampson, another rookie. Ravens have a guy by the name of Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell. Then we'll throw Patrick Ricard in here as a fullback as well. And the Steelers, Jalen Warren, Caleb Johnson, a rookie, and Kenneth Gainwell. Who do you like the most? Who do you like the least here, Jonas?
Yeah, let's start off with the easy one. It's obviously the Ravens. You have the guy who in any other non-Saquon Barkley on the Eagles year would have led the NFL in rushing, averaged almost 6 yards a carry, 16 touchdowns, first in rushing yards over expected. You have Justice Hill, who's a total weapon as a third down back. Keaton Mitchell looks like he's back to his old speed, if not even faster than he was in 2023. And then you have Patrick Ricard, who, Pro Bowl fullback perennially. So it's pretty easy to go with the Ravens. Obviously, it's tough to separate the value that these guys extract from Lamar and from an offensive line that turned out to be pretty good last year. But it's Derrick Henry, it's Pat Ricard, it's a bunch of guys who know their place and do it well. It's an obvious number one for me.
Me too. And next up, I am curious to see where you have these two teams ranked, Bengals and Steelers. I have the Bengals second, despite the fact that they were 30th in the NFL in rushing yards. Because to me, I look at that number and I say, well, they were losing so many games by so many points because their defense was so bad. And they just put the ball in Joe Burrow's hands and said, get us out of this. Steelers were a team that performed much better on the ground, but obviously they lose their leading running back. Where do you have the Bengals and Steelers ranked here, Jonas?
Yeah, I'd probably go Bengals too. I think Chase Brown impressed a lot of people with what he did last year. Was almost 1,000 yards on the ground, almost over 350 yards through the air. Added an explosive element to that Browns running game that they haven't really had in a long while. They certainly didn't have it when Joe Mixon was there. He finished the year top 20 on PFF in running back grade. That just shittiness of that offensive line makes it tough to evaluate any of these guys. Um, and along with Joe Burrow's stubbornness to kind of not want to get into an under center game and maybe give some of these guys more favorable looks. Uh, I think we expected more from Zach Moss based on kind of what we expected him to do and based on what he had done in Indy. But he's a fine RB2. Samaje Perine, not really anything to write home about. But I just think that Chase Brown probably is a more dynamic back at this point than Jalen Warren. I was pretty disappointed in what he did last year. I think I drafted him in one of my fantasy drafts based on the expectation that he would overtake Najee Harris pretty clearly in that Steelers run game or in that Steelers offense, and it never really happened. Obviously, Caleb Johnson could be a great fit for that Steelers rushing attack with all the zone stuff they did. He did Iowa and the zone stuff that Arthur Smith probably will lean more into in Pittsburgh. But for right now, he's a rookie, and I think if you're betting on just pure upside of RB1, I would prefer the Bengals over the Steelers.
I would too, and it's good to keep in mind that yes, the Steelers obviously were top half of the league in terms of rushing yards, but they lost 3 of their top 4 rushers. I mean, one of those guys was Najee Harris, who went to the Chargers. One of those guys was Justin Fields. So they're kind of starting over a little bit at that position. And then last but not least, but absolutely least, I have the Browns because they were 29th in rushing yards last year. Jerome Ford led the team in rushing yards, and he was 38th in the NFL. 4 quarterbacks, including Lamar Jackson, had more rushing yards than the Browns' leading running back last year. Do you have the Browns number 1 as well, as in the worst, Jonas?
Yeah, pretty clearly. I think the 2 rookies could be fun. Dylan Sampson's tape at Notre Dame was pretty nice. Obviously he had a great offensive line there in South Bend, but Judkins, they're I think expecting him to be RB1 pretty early there. The fact that they took him 36th overall, he was great at Ole Miss. He was a little less productive, I think, than we expected at Ohio State, but obviously he was sharing that backfield with Travion Henderson. So it's going to be interesting to see how those guys fit. I mean, so much of that rushing game is going to depend on that offensive line, which, a couple years ago was one of the best in the NFL. They were a battering ram, just creating holes for Nick Chubb. But now guys have gotten hurt. They've lost some guys. Nick Chubb obviously had his injury woes and has fallen off. So their offensive line situation could make it tough to evaluate just how good those top 3 are. But again, I think Ford was pretty good last year, but just not a whole lot of volume that I think is enough to overtake the Steelers for number 3.
All right. The Ravens' dominance will end here, I think, as we get into the wide receiver / tight end spot. Jonas, are you in agreement that the Bengals, after extending both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, should have the number 1 spot in this position group?
Yeah, it's pretty clear. You got 2 arguably top 15 wide receivers, top 20 wide receivers in the NFL, and Jamar Chase is top 2 or top 3. So they would make life easy for any quarterback, and they make Joe Burrow a pretty exceptional one.
Yeah, both those wide receivers together signed extensions that may have inhibited the Bengals from signing other guys, but they have them under contract. Total dollar amount for those 2 combined, $276 million. Behind the Bengals, though, do you have the Browns, the Steelers, or the Ravens here?
I have the Ravens as number 2.
I do too.
It's, I think, pretty easy. If we're being honest, you have a Pro Bowl receiver in Zay Flowers. You've got a really nice number 2 in Rashad Bateman, who we think is still ascendant. DeAndre Hopkins, I think a lot of teams would kill to have as their wide receiver 3. And then you have, the best tight end room in the NFL in all likelihood. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler. All those guys can do different things in this offense. All of them have been productive in their own ways. Obviously, Charlie Kohler more so as a blocker than as a receiver. But, again, another situation where how much of Zay's or Rashad Bateman's or Isaiah Likely's production last year was because Lamar is just extending plays, giving these guys the time to get open and find pockets of space downfield. It's tough to say, but I think the fact that they were, you look at those ESPN receiver scores, and I think Zay, Bateman, Hopkins, and Andrews were all like top 20, top 25-ish in open score last year, suggests that they know how to get away from their man in man coverage or in zone coverage. And I don't think it's crazy to say that these guys are probably closer to the top of the division in receiver talent than they've ever been.
I agree. And what they may lack in obviously Zay Flowers was a Pro Bowler last year, but what they may lack in top end talent, obviously the two guys on the Bengals and Chase and Higgins are better than anybody that the Ravens have at receiver, but they are so deep. There are going to be so many mouths to feed. It's going to be a storyline we're going to be talking about all season long is how do you get the ball to your three tight ends, to your three wide receivers, and then watching what DeAndre Hopkins can do in this wide receiver room as the X threat that they have not had with Lamar Jackson at quarterback is going to be fascinating. Next up, Jonas, third on this list, I have the Steelers, who added DK Metcalf, traded a second rounder for them this year. They did send out George Pickens to Dallas for a sixth rounder. I worry about their depth after DK Metcalf, especially because he can get hurt. Calvin Austin is probably their wide receiver too, I would think, in Pittsburgh. That would concern me just a little bit, but the presence of DK Metcalf is enough to put them over the Browns.
Yeah, I don't love either team's top end, or I guess their secondary and tertiary wide receivers. I think you could probably say DK Metcalf versus Jerry Jeudy is a bit of a wash. I think we're all waiting to see just how real Jerry Jeudy is in a post Jameis Winston world. I think we're all curious to see what DK Metcalf looks like in a world where maybe, or well, where Aaron Rodgers definitely doesn't have the arm strength that he used to, or perhaps the willingness to throw over the middle field. Not that DK is a great intermediate threat there anyway, but I think when you just consider the tiebreaker here, it's probably the tight end room, like Freiermuth, bringing in Jonnu Smith, having Darnell Washington be your your wide tight end as a big strong blocker. Again, it's not adding a whole lot to your receiving game, but I think it does make your offense tougher to defend. So I think by the slimmest of margins, I would probably have the Steelers here over the Browns, even though it seems like some people really like Cedric Tillman and what he could be as an X receiver. I guess he was pretty banged up last year. I think he got a concussion early in the season. We like David Njoku, but we always kind of wonder, what he's going to give you on a game by game basis. Harold Fannin for the Browns, obviously, could be a bust, could be a stud. He was over 1,500 yards at Bowling Green last year, lit it up against Texas A&M, killed Penn State, but he doesn't have that kind of pure seamless athleticism that definitely hurt his draft stock. But it wouldn't surprise me if he's an immediate sensation either.
All right. Offensive line, our last group on the offensive side. At this point last year, we were wringing our hands over the group that the Ravens had assembled at the O-line. They were turning over 3 starting spots on that offensive line. We were wondering how it was all going to come together, and there were certainly some bumps along the road. And then when all was said and done, the Ravens, according to ESPN, finished 3rd in pass block win rate, 3rd in run block win rate, and now they get to bring back most of those same pieces this year, with the exception of Patrick McCary and some other guys. How do you feel about this group right now, this Ravens offensive line?
Yeah, I don't think they are as elite as those ESPN metrics would suggest, but I think they're pretty clearly the least concerning unit of these 4 here. You've got an all-pro level talent in Tyler Linderbaum. You've got an ascending right tackle in Rosengarten, and then you've got guys who should be at least solid in Voorhees and Faalele. And then, obviously the big question is Ronnie Stanley and his durability. I think he played pretty well. He earned that big contract extension over this offseason. But you just look at how this group stacks up to the other 3 teams in this division, and they just have far fewer questions. And, you look at their depth. Ben Cleveland, depending on his availability with that looming possible suspension for the drinking offense this offseason, he could be a stopgap option. Joe Noteboom, I think, gives you good depth. We're still waiting to see exactly what the plan is for Emory Jones Jr., but they took him in the 3rd round, and that would suggest that they feel like he could contribute either at tackle, perhaps at guard. So I think they have just really admirable depth. And as we saw last year, there were some games where they gave Lamar a lot of time and they gave Derrick Henry a lot of holes to hit. And I think there are no other lines in this division that really have that track record looking back at 2024.
Yeah, I do like the Browns group. I have the Browns group second, going projected starters going left to right. Juwan Jones, I should say, Joel Bitonio, Eason Posick, Wyatt Teller, Jack Conklin, because they're pretty experienced. I mean, you could also worry on the flip side of that coin is they're a little bit older. They might be a little bit more banged up. They might take a step back athletically. Batonio's 33, Posick is 29, Teller's 30, Conklin is 30. The only inexperienced guy on that group is Jones, who was really bad last year, but I still like 4 starters on that offensive line, and that's why I have them second behind the Ravens.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So it comes down to, I guess, just your expectations for what the Steelers group could do. I was surprised to find how low some of these offseason rankings had them. I think a lot of that is probably baked into the Broderick Jones factor of it all. He was not good as a right tackle last year. Now they're throwing him at left tackle, the most important position on, one of the most important positions on that offense, considering you're protecting Aaron Rodgers' blind side. But Frazier was great as a rookie. I think Mason McCormick did some nice things. Sayamalo at left guard was a nice run blocker. And then, I really like Troy Fautanu. He didn't play, I think, more than like 50 snaps or so coming out of Washington last year as a rookie, but his tape in college was, I thought, really, really good and first round worthy. So I have high hopes for them, or I guess higher hopes than normal for them. But I just don't know how much that is projection versus what the Bengals have.
Yeah, it's certainly a group with a lot of promise. The 2 first-round picks are what you would latch onto if you were a Steelers fan and hoping that those guys develop. And then the Bengals group, I mean, Ted Karras was their best offensive lineman last year, and he was ranked 21st by PFF. So they just don't have a whole lot of sure things at all on that offensive line. And Amarius Mims, a guy that we were looking at as a potential first-round pick by the Ravens a year ago, did not pan out in his rookie season. Again, he's incredibly talented, and he's raw. Coming out of Georgia, did not have a whole lot of starts under his belt, but I just don't feel as good about that Bengals group as I do about the Steelers group. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's Lucas Patrick or Cody Ford at right guard, it's a little bit iffy, and we saw just how important those guard spots are especially when you go into these games against teams with the kind of interior talent as the Ravens and the Steelers. I mean, Nami Madubuike had a great game in that primetime win over the Bengals in Baltimore last year. Putting a rookie like Dylan Fairchild out there, only a 3rd-round pick. I know he's big and athletic, but still, you need some fine-tuned technique to be able to go out there. Orlando Brown, we all know that he's can be a little bit sloppy at times in his footwork. Amarius Mims, you just wonder about his ability to stay healthy. That's an issue that's plagued him going back to his days at Georgia. He has all-world potential, but again, is he going to be out there at practice and in games enough to actually develop into the guy that we both imagined he could be? So I think it's fine to have the Steelers ahead of the Bengals. I think Joe Burrow covers up a lot of these mistakes in the same way that Lamar does for the Ravens, just because of how quickly he's able to process and get that ball out before the pressure can really get to him. But I think, considering what Pittsburgh could be as a run blocking force this year, and some of those young guys that we know have actually done it and shown it on the field, like a Frazier, like a McCormick, I'm more comfortable having them at 3 and putting the Browns, the Bengals in last place again.
So those are all the offensive positions. If you are watching, you can see the scores. If you're listening, I'll read them out here. So far, the Ravens have 19 points, Bengals have 14 points, Steelers have 10, and the Browns come in with 7. We're going to do defensive front next, Jonas. This is a combination of positions here. This is interior defensive line plus the edge rusher, so defensive ends and outside linebackers. And Jonas, we might get some hate from Ravens fans because a lot of where we rank the Ravens here, despite the fact that they were near the top of the league in sacks, the advanced metrics were not as kind to them. And that's something that we were saying as the season was going along. And yes, the counting stats by the end of the season looked great. I'm not sure they were getting as much pressure as they should have been.
They were getting pressure, but some of it was schemed up. Some of it was just, user error by the offense. So I think the fact that the Ravens finished 29th in pass rush win rate, I always stumble over those freaking words, a little bit misleading. I think more misleading is the run stop win rate, because it's not like, we know Roquan is an all-world run defender, but I still think I always have issues with that stat because it never really matches with the eye test. Like you're telling me that Travis Jones and Nnamdi Madubuike and Michael Pierce and Broderick Washington were getting pushed around to such a degree that they were like bottom third in the NFL in those categories. It seems a little bit iffy to me. So I'm curious to see just where we go with this. I think for me, pretty clearly, it's Steelers number one.
Yep.
Uh, again, when we're talking about defensive front, we're talking interior defensive linemen and edge rushers, so defensive ends / outside linebackers. I think you have, assuming that Watt is back for the Steelers. Obviously, he's been the subject of some trade speculation, but I don't think Pittsburgh, considering where they've pushed all their chips into the middle of the table, they're not going to trade Watt this close to the season when they've already taken a couple big swings at getting over that playoff bump. Cameron Hayward was one of the best interior defenders in the NFL last year. You bring in Derek Harmon, who I loved as a draft prospect. I think
Me too.
I think he led all interior defensive linemen last year in college in total pressures. Keanu Benton is a solid, Robin for whoever is the Batman up there. And then you look at just the depth at that outside linebacker spot. Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, both a little bit banged up last year, but still super productive when they got onto the field. Highsmith beat Ronnie Stanley a couple times, I think, in one of those games. So it's hard for me to pick against anyone but TJ Watt and the Steelers, just considering what they have coming back and also who they added in the offseason.
Yes, I completely agree. And next up, we have kind of another team with an asterisk on here. At least I do. I have the Bengals next with a massive, massive asterisk here because we don't know about the status of Trey Hendrickson, if he's going to get extended, if he's going to get traded, what it is. But do you have the Bengals next, Jonas, as well?
I don't, because I think it's just Trey Hendrickson and a bunch of Jags.
There aren't any Jaguars on this team. Maybe some former Jaguars. I think they also added first round pick Shamar Stewart, who had like no production, but has a ton of tools at Texas A&M. I like that. I look at Myles Garrett, to me, is kind of holding up the Browns group in a similar way that Trey Hendrickson is the Bengals. No,
but you said the Bengals, not the Browns.
I have the Bengals as the next group, and then the Browns behind them.
So you have the Ravens last?
I do.
I don't know, dude. I mean, they have an All-Pro in Madubuike. They were the best rushing defense in the NFL last year. I think this just goes to how heavily you're weighing the value of pass rush versus run stopping, and I guess just what your projection is for some of the young guys on this edge rushing group and what they could do in 2025.
Also, how much of that was, I know he was injured at times last year, but Michael Pierce was a large part of that run defense. He retired. They didn't
played
really
like a quarter of the snaps, though.
They didn't really find a suitable replacement for him. And they have acknowledged themselves that they wish that they had done a better job finding a replacement for Michael Pierce. I have high hopes for Dafe Owe in a contract year who just added a bunch of muscle, but I still have concerns about him being kind of a top tier edge rusher. Certainly the Bengals and Browns in Hendrickson are able to, and TJ and Myles Garrett have the guy that the Ravens don't have, a premier pass rusher, and the Ravens don't have that guy. I don't know. Maybe I'm too close to the sun here, and I'm looking at too many flaws along this Ravens pass rush.
I just think that we should give the Ravens credit for some depth. I mean, they signed John Jenkins as their Pierce replacement. Travis Jones is their starter. Travis Jones will be better in year 4 than he was in year 3. And then you're talking about, like, if Mike Green is your edge 3,
he's a
4.
He's a huge X factor in all this as a second round pick.
It's not like, Owe and Van Noy were just beating up on the, little sisters of the poor last year. I mean, they were definitely streaky, but I think they both finished top 20 in that ESPN pass rush win rate that we just cited. So I think you give them both some credit. I think I'm definitely higher. We're doing our top 20 Ravens for next for this season next week, and I think I had Owe higher than Van Noy in my own personal pecking order, just because I'm remain a little bit skeptical of Van Noy's ability to produce at the age that he is now advancing toward, and I still think Adafe is an ascendant talent. I just think maybe we are a little bit too close to the supply here. Maybe we're getting a little bit too high off that supply with believing in Tavius Robinson and what he can be with another year in the system, and believing in Adafe Owe with what he can do in the strength. And we've got Adisa Isaac, who didn't do anything, but he was a third-round pick. And, who knows what David Ojabo could be? He could be anything, but he could also be very, very bad. I just think that I don't know who has the combination of solid outside edge rushers, proven interior pass rushers, and also just overall run defense that the Ravens have. So I think I would probably have them number 2 overall, and
Wow.
then have the
All right.
Brown. I guess I would have the Bengals third because they got TJ Slayton, who was a really nice run stuffer, even though he's not really, he's a bit like Michael Pearson, that he's just limited to clogging up the A gap and doing good work there. And then I think just the Bengals, obviously Trey Hendrickson is one of the best 3 or 4 edge rushers in the NFL. Myles Garrett for the Browns is one of the best 2 or 3 edge rushers in the NFL, but it falls off a cliff pretty steeply there. They lost Dalvin Tomlinson. They drafted Mason Graham, but is he going to be an exceptionally productive guy in year one? It's a little bit tough for me to see there. I don't know. The Bengals and Browns were just so bad run defense last year that it's tough for me. It feels like I'm splitting hairs with those guys, but I just think that the Ravens, say what you will about that pass rush win rate, that they were as good as they were against the run last year, and they basically didn't lose anyone from that pass rush, and they give all these young guys either the opportunity to come to Baltimore or to take a step forward in Baltimore. To me, I just have more confidence in them, even though they don't have the top level talent that every other team in this division has.
Maybe I'm also too biased by the last time we saw this team on the field against Buffalo, where it just felt like there were too many times where the Ravens defense could have gotten off the field if they had just stopped the Bills offense from running the ball. I mean, obviously that loss does not necessarily fall on the defense. It probably falls more on the turnovers that the Ravens committed. And frankly, it falls on the fact that the Ravens defense did not commit many turnovers, but it just felt like that was a very stoppable Bills offense. That was an offense that did not have the firepower that they had in previous seasons and was so committed to running the ball down the Ravens' throats. And for the most part, they did it. And that was what perhaps is sticking in my craw a little bit too much. But all right, you have for defensive fronts, you've got Steelers 4 points, Ravens 3 points, Bengals 2 points, Browns 1 point. We're going to do something unconventional for off-ball linebacker here, Jonas. All of these groups are pretty good. They're just pretty good. And this is a position that is important, sure, but it doesn't have as many bodies on the field as other position groups. And that's why we're going to give all 4 teams a singular point for this position.
Yeah, it's good politics. It's good business. Ravens, you have the best pure inside linebacker in this group in Roquan, and then I think you have the least encouraging depth. Like, there's the expectation that Trenton Simpson breaks through, but there's no guarantee. And then if he doesn't, you're not left with really anything because Malik Harrison's gone. Chris Board is gone. I think anyone expecting Teddy Buchanan to be a sensation in year one is kind of fooling themselves. And then Jay Kummel is basically, a special teams guy. So this is not going to be 2023 all over again. If you're asking, if you're putting a gun to my head, I don't think that, I think Trent Simpson's going to be a solid player. I think the road for him to becoming a good player is still a pretty long one based on the fact that he was, benched midway through last year. But you compare this group to the other teams in this division, and it's just a bunch of guys with pretty limited ceilings or pretty questionable depth. And even though the Ravens might have the highest ceiling of any of these teams because of the Roquan factor and because of how athletic Simpson and Buchanan are, I think, God forbid Roquan goes down with a sprained ankle or a concussion or something, and this group is really, really in trouble.
Yeah, I do like Peyton Wilson a lot as, what was he, a 3rd round pick a year ago by the Steelers. And then the kind of thing that throws off the entire calculus of all of this is Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and what he dealt with. Somebody who was incredibly talented, but obviously not a factor there anymore. All right. We gave them all 1 point for off-ball linebackers. Defensive backs. How do you have these 4 teams ranked here, Jonas?
I think it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
It's Ravens number 1. You've got 2 already certified stars and Marlon Humphrey and Kyle Hamilton, and you've got another ascendant young talent in Nate Wiggins, and you're bringing in Jair Alexander on a kind of prove it deal that is very team friendly. And again, I liked what I saw when I looked back at his 6 or 7 or 8 games, however many games he played last year for Green Bay. Use your first round pick on Malachi Starks. You've got pretty good depth behind them, even though it is definitely all unproven with TJ Tampa, Jalen Umber Davis, Chidobe Awuzie. Just it's it's a group that I think you could probably have the argument for with the Steelers if you just limit it to cornerbacks. But I think the tiebreaker here, if there were needed to be one, is just the talent at safety. I think Kyle Hamilton, Malachi Starks, Darius Washington, if he comes back and if he looks like himself in 2024, pretty easily clears Deshaun Elliott and Juan Thornhill.
Yeah, I've got the Steelers as my second team. Do you have the Steelers any lower?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, Steelers. I just think, yes, they have 2 older cornerbacks who might be losing a step in Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay, but Jalen Ramsey, both those guys are still really good. I mean, Jalen Ramsey was PFF's number 11 cornerback last year. Darius Slay was number 23 according to PFF. He's 34 years old. You just don't see cornerbacks playing as long and being as productive as Darius Slay has been this late in his career. So could there be a fall off coming? Perhaps, but until we see it, I'm not ready to write him off. And the Jalen Ramsey trade, yes, they lost Minkah Fitzpatrick in it. Whether that was wise or not, who's to say? But they did get a very good shutdown corner. And then Joey Porter Jr., weirdly, is somebody that they had a lot of hopes for and showed a lot of promise in his rookie season. Did not have a very good season last year, but I still think the Steelers have the second best group here.
Yeah, penalties have been his undoing, but it was surprising to see that he allowed over 600 yards in coverage last year. That's not really what you expect for a guy who was getting called for as many flags as he was. Just a random thought ball, but you obviously you have a lot of Eagles fans in your life. Who would you rather have just for this year, Darius Slay or Nate Wiggins?
Oof. I mean, obviously, long term, Nate Wiggins, I believe, can be a true number 1 shutdown corner on the outside. I would still probably go with Nate Wiggins because I'm pretty bullish on his ascendancy. I think that he was young when he got taken. He was skinny when he got taken. He is a little bit older and he's a little bit more bulked up. And the Ravens have clearly shown how much they believe in him by sticking him on the outside and having Marlon Humphrey on the inside. So to me, it would probably be Nate Wiggins, and especially because you give him another year in this defense with Zach Orr. I think that he took a lot of strides by the end of the year. I would take Nate Wiggins here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We should mention Beanie Bishop. Steelers, kind of a weird year at nickelback for them last year as a rookie. He had 4 interceptions, which is a pretty nice figure, but he still had a pretty hilariously bad low mark on PFF, which suggests that maybe those picks were just right place, right time instances, and he's not actually that talented. But at least he gives you another option in the slot if they want Jalen Ramsey outside or if they want Jalen Ramsey at safety. So I think Ramsey gives you a little bit more flexibility than what the Ravens have right now, because the Ravens have 2 safeties that they probably are going to only exclusively play at safety, whereas Ramsey, he played safety in college. He can move around outside, inside. So I think he's probably at this point like the greatest talent in this division. You can maybe quibble, at least at the cornerback spot, you could probably quibble with Marlon and Denzel Ward. But I think Jalen Ramsey, based on his track record, based on just his overall chess piece-ness, is probably the top talent in the division now that he's arrived.
And then the final 2 teams in this group, the Bengals and the Browns. I have the Browns higher because they have Denzel Ward, but beyond that, little yucky. Same with the Bengals. They have kind of all yucky at defensive back, and they didn't do a whole lot to fix that group this offseason.
No, I mean the Bengals told Geno Stone that we're going to give you a pay cut, but they're also telling him that you're going to be a starter this year. So I don't know what else you can say about this Bengals DB core. It's the Browns. We saw them be elite in 2023 when that defense was awesome and fierce and a beast. And then last year, even though Denzel Ward was still a really productive player, it was everything around him that kind of fell apart. I think I was listening to Mina Kimes' podcast previewing the AFC North yesterday, and maybe it was her or Robert Mays who was on to talk about it. But when their EPA or QBR, when the quarterback wasn't pressured, was first in 2023, and it was outside the top 20 last year. So that gives you some sense for just how volatile defensive back play can be in general. Just offer that as a reminder for this whole exercise in general. Like, defense is going to be a lot more unpredictable than offense because you don't have a quarterback to be that stabilizing factor on the defensive side of the ball. But we've seen Martin Emerson Jr. have a good season. It was just one season, but it was still a nice season. We know Greg Newsome has a talent with his first round pedigree. Brant Delpit back in his college days at LSU was awesome. Ronnie Hickman last year was solid, and I think just the sheer volume of solid at worst players on this Browns secondary for me helps them clear the bar. And the Bengals, you're just still kind of wondering how much of what they struggled with the past couple of years was a Lou and Arumo problem, and how much of that was just a overall talent problem.
All right, we are done with the offense. We are done with the defense. We have two categories remaining: special teams and coaching. And Jonas, when you look at the special teams, there was one good special teams team in this group last year. It was the Pittsburgh Steelers. Everybody else was pretty bad. And that's why I have the Steelers as the number one group atop this heap.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Boswell didn't miss a kick against the
elite.
Ravens last year. Yeah, 41 for 44 on field goals, and they were just really good in other aspects of that special teams play. They finished second in DVOA last year on special teams, according to FTN. Like you said, pretty clear number one.
And then beyond those group, though, it's kind of a hodgepodge. Ravens are going with a rookie kicker, whether it is Tyler Loop or John Hoyland. To me, I also look at the fact they added a rookie in the 6th round in LeJontay Wester that could be intriguing as a returner. It's also interesting to see what they do at kick returner as opposed to punt returner, because they're obviously have this new kickoff rule still in place this year, but John Harbaugh has a little bit more data now at his disposal, former special teams coach. And he said, he mentioned at some point during OTAs or mandatory minicamp that based on the data that he has seen, running backs have done better out of the kickoff than wide receivers. So maybe they go with Keaton Mitchell, who might have a little bit more burst back at kick return, and they go with Wester if he's able to hold on to a roster spot at punt return. I'm not exactly sure. And then obviously just a massive question mark at kicker.
Yeah, I think for me, if we're going to put the Browns last because they were one of the 3 worst special teams units in the NFL last year, maybe we're just over-indexing. Maybe I'm over-indexing the value of the kicker in the modern NFL. But I think there's probably not going to be a huge projected difference between the Ravens returners and the Bengals returners, because we just don't know who the Ravens returners will be, nor do we know how good they will be. So for me, it just comes down to who do you trust more between the Ravens kicking situation and the Bengals kicking situation. And to me, it's pretty clearly I would trust Evan McPherson over Tyler Loop, at least for this coming year. McPherson did not have a good year last year, 16 for 22, under 73%. But for the most part, he's been a pretty solid kicker. That was his first year under 82% accuracy on field goals. So, it could be that Tyler Loop proves us all wrong, or proves all the haters wrong, and is a guy who comes in and has a Justin Tucker like impact as a rookie. But for me, I am just sticking with the sure thing, and for me, that's Evan McPherson and this Bengals special teams core.
Yeah, and last but not least, coaching. And this is a veteran seasoned group here. We have not had a new head coach in this division since 2019 when Zach Taylor got hired. We're also keeping, into consideration the offensive and defensive coordinators here. The 2 longest tenured head coaches in the NFL reside in this division. How would you untangle this group here, Jonas?
It's, I think, pretty clear just the fact that the Ravens had, by the end of last year, by the end of last regular season, the best team in the NFL, and they had an offense that was humming, and they had a defense that figured things out slowly but surely with Zach Orr. So the fact that you retain, obviously John Harbaugh's not going anywhere. You retain Todd Monken, you have Zach Orr, you bring in a former head coach and defensive coordinator in Chuck Pagano. You make some changes to that coaching staff at some of the positional levels that were a little bit problematic for you. Um, you know, I think most people would agree that John Harbaugh is a top 10 coach in the NFL at this point, if not top five. And
Most reasonable
he,
people.
yeah, most reasonable people. And you look at the instability or questionability of some of the other coordinators hires in this division. For me, I would understand if you would say, the Steelers, or maybe if you're, a big Zach Taylor stan and you're saying that he's just been undone by his defensive coordinator. Well, that's part of the job, is to hire guys and put them in positions to succeed. So I think the fact that John Harbaugh just has this track record of success, and the fact that he's bringing back Todd Monken, a guy who could be head coach next year, and cultivating another up and comer, Zach Orr, who could also be head coach next year, it's hard for me to go anywhere else but the Ravens. And you also throw into the fact that, when he's needed to, John Harbaugh has embraced being aggressive on fourth down and going for two when it's analytically prudent. So I think for me, John Harbaugh and company are number one.
And for me, it's not a close second either, because I have the Steelers second. It would be disrespectful to not put Mike Tomlin, I think, next up on this list, despite the fact that I still don't like Arthur Smith at offensive coordinator. And I still think this could be the final year for Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh. But just look at the quarterbacks that he has had to cycle through over the last several years. And this finally might be the undoing of him, getting somebody who is as decrepit on the field as Aaron Rodgers and as much of a locker room cancer as he is off the field. Tomlin has dealt with some, malfactors before, but this might be the one that undoes him. Still, we have to give Mike Tomlin the respect he's due and put him right behind John Harbaugh and his coaching staff, right behind the Ravens in this group. Do you agree?
Yeah, and I was on I did an appearance on a Steelers podcast
Huge
a
flex.
day or two ago. Steelers Depot, great guys, great podcast. Check it out. Who do you think needs a breakthrough more, Lamar Jackson to the Super Bowl, or Mike Tomlin for just a general playoff win?
Probably. That's a good question. I mean, Tomlin is would maybe be more fighting for his job. Obviously, Lamar Jackson's not going anywhere. Public perception wise, I think it would be Lamar, because I don't want to be sitting here in several months and having the same conversation about how Lamar seemingly can't get a team to the Super Bowl. Because I also think Mike Tomlin, if this is it for him, if he, whether they make the playoffs and they don't win a playoff game, or whether they don't make the playoffs, if they collapse entirely and he finally has a losing season, he has cemented his reputation as a Super Bowl winner. He is going to, I still think, be able to get just about any job, any open job he would want to in the NFL, because of what he's done there. So public perception wise, I think it would be Lamar Jackson. But in terms of holding onto his job, it would probably be Mike Tomlin.
Yeah, we talk about, First Take talks about quarterbacks. It doesn't really talk about head coaches.
Right. All right. Bengals and Browns. I still do like both these head coaches. Kevin Stefanski for the Browns, Zach Taylor for the Bengals. Stefanski, how much can you really judge him? Talk about terrible quarterback situations. How much can you really judge him for the quarterbacks that he has had to cycle through, as well as the off-field issues that he has had to talk about? And then the Bengals, to me, it's got to come down to, are they able to fix their defense with Al Golden, who is the former defensive coordinator under Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame?
Can we give both of them too? It's tough for me to really differentiate between them. Like you said, the Browns, Stefanski's paid a pretty hefty Deshaun Watson tax the past couple of years, and the Bengals have paid a bad ownership tax the past couple of years. So it's tough for me to say definitively that one is better than the other. I guess if I were forced to choose, I would probably just say, well, the Bengals have actually had some recent playoff success, and Stefanski, other than that one,
he took the Browns, the
comment of a season,
Cleveland Browns, to the playoffs and won a playoff game. Come on. And also went to St. Joe's.
Zach Taylor took the Bengals to the Super Bowl.
He did. If I had to rank them, I would probably go Browns actually above the Bengals, because I also do like Jim Schwartz as their defensive coordinator there.
That's fine. That works.
Okay, cool. Well, that just about wraps up our ranking here. The final scores, if you were watching, you can see it. If you're listening, I'll read them out here. At the top of the division, we have the Baltimore Ravens with 32 points. Behind them is the Pittsburgh Steelers at 25. Then the Bengals, 23. And finally, the lowly Cleveland Browns at 13 points. Jonas, I think that exercise showed us pretty much what we expected to see, which is that the Ravens, we expect to be the 3-time reigning division champions. The Steelers, we ended up giving them quite a lot of points, even though I think that there's a chance it turns out to be a disaster. And the Bengals, right behind them, and the Browns, that will almost assuredly be a disaster in Cleveland.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little bit surprised that the Steelers finished ahead of the Bengals, because I think the expectation and the Super Bowl odds reflect that the Bengals are the Ravens' biggest challenger in the division. But obviously, the Steelers have made some moves. They have some promising young players that are still on the come up. You trust Tomlin more than you do anyone from the Brown staff or the Bengals staff. So it's going to be, I think, a dogfight in the division in general, but specifically for that second place spot. But I think when you talk about the Ravens, probably the best offense in the NFL this coming year. Defense should be one of the most talented. We'll see if that talent actually translates into productivity, because it certainly didn't at the start of last year. And then you're just left with the questions in special teams, and even there, who else in the NFL among the head coaches would you trust to turn this ship around more than John Harbaugh, a guy who got his job in Baltimore by virtue of what he'd done as a special teams coordinator in Philly? So certainly the whole Justin Tucker situation and just the general special teams disaster class that was put on display last year is not giving us a lot of confidence. But if the Ravens fell from like number 3 in DVOA to number 21 in DVOA, then I think it stands to reason that they could just as easily become a top 5 unit again pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, that just about does it for the Banner Ravens podcast. Let us know what you think of the division rankings. If you think we put the Ravens too high a pedestal, or perhaps did not give them enough credit. We will have a few more episodes, barring some breaking news. We'll always go live with some breaking news, but assuming the Ravens don't blow up our phones over the coming weeks, we'll have several more episodes before we get into the start of training camp, which is at the end of July. July 23rd is the first full team practice. Everybody, go out there, enjoy your Independence Day. We will keep you up to date on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. Read all of Jonas Shaffer and Gianna Hahn and Kyle Goon's great work there. And, of course, subscribe to the Banner Ravens podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. Write us a 5-star review, and I will read it out here on the show. For Jonas Shaffer,